I never thought I'd be the type of person to cheat. I used to look at people who did and think, how could you? I thought it was simple: if you love someone, you stay faithful. If you don't, you leave. But life isn't always that black and white. I've been married to James for 7 years. He's a good man, stable, kind, predictable. He's the type of person who never forgets to take out the trash, who refills the gas tank before it hits empty, who schedules our dentist appointments 6 months in advance. And I love that about him. I still do. But over the years, our marriage became something functional rather than passionate. We kissed goodbye out of habit. We had sex maybe once a month, always in the same position, always at the same time of night. There were no surprises, no spontaneous moments of wild attraction, just routine. And then there was Aiden. I met him at a work conference in Seattle. He was everything James wasn't: unpredictable, exciting, and a little reckless. He had this way of looking at me like I was the most fascinating person in the room, like he actually saw me. I hadn't felt that way in years. It started innocently, or at least that's what I told myself. Aiden and I were just talking, just getting drinks after the meetings. But then the way he touched my arm lingered a little too long. The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. And before I knew it, I was flirting back. That night, after too many glasses of wine, we ended up in his hotel room. It wasn't planned. I didn't walk into that conference thinking I was going to cheat. But the moment his lips were on mine, something inside me snapped, like I had been holding my breath for years, and finally, I could breathe again. I should have stopped. I should have thought about James, about our life together, about what this meant. But I didn't. I let Aiden undress me, let him take me apart piece by piece until there was nothing left of the woman who used to believe in loyalty, in marriage vows, in doing the right thing. The next morning, I woke up in a tangle of sheets that weren't mine, my body sore in ways I hadn't felt in years. Aiden was still asleep, his arm draped lazily over my waist. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself pretend this was my life, that I wasn't married, that I wasn't about to go home to a husband who trusted me, who loved me, who would never do what I had just done. I left before Aiden woke up. I packed my things, went to the airport, and flew home like nothing had happened. When I walked through the front door, James was there, smiling, asking me how my trip was. And I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, just a strange, empty numbness. That was 3 months ago. I haven't seen Aiden since, but we still text sometimes. Nothing inappropriate, just small things. A joke here, a meme there. But every time I see his name pop up on my screen, my heart skips a beat. I don't know if I regret what I did. I know it was wrong. I know if James ever found out, it would break him. But I also know that for the first time in years, I felt alive. And that scares me more than anything. 3 months later, my life should have gone back to normal. I should have felt guilty, confessed, or at least tried harder to fix my marriage. But I didn't. I kept waking up next to James, having dinner with him, talking about our days like we always had. Nothing had changed, and maybe that was the problem. But inside, I was different. Aiden was still in my head. Not in an obsessive, I can't live without him kind of way, but in the way you think about something that reminds you of a version of yourself you didn't know existed. A version that felt things deeply. A version that took risks. A version that didn't just exist, but actually lived. And I missed that version of me. One night, James and I were sitting on the couch watching some forgettable Netflix show. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and I felt nothing. Not disgust, not sadness, not even guilt. Just nothing. It terrified me. So I told myself I needed to stop thinking about Aiden. I needed to focus on my husband, on my marriage. I even planned a surprise weekend getaway for us, a little cabin upstate, just the two of us, no distractions. It was supposed to be our fresh start. But then Aiden texted me. Aiden, thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. It was a simple message. No pressure. No expectations. But it was enough to pull me right back into his orbit. And I caved. I told James the first had to go on a last-minute business trip. He didn't even question it. He kissed my forehead, told me to have a safe flight, and went back to whatever he was watching on TV. It took less than 24 hours for me to be back in Aiden's arms. I met him in Chicago this time. A work excuse, a conference that didn't exist. When I saw him waiting for me at the hotel lobby, that same dangerous, easy smile on his lips, I felt my resolve melt away. "You came," he said, his voice low, laced with something deeper. I just nodded, because what was there to say? We barely made it to the hotel room before we were on each other. It was reckless, desperate, and nothing like what I had at home. With James, everything was careful, measured. With Aiden, it was fire. Lying in bed afterward, my body still humming from him, he looked at me and said, "Are you ever gonna leave him?" And for the first time I didn't know how to answer. I had always assumed this was just an affair, a fleeting escape, a moment of stolen time that could never exist in the real world. But Aiden wasn't asking for stolen moments anymore. He was asking for something bigger. And the worst part? A part of me wanted to say yes. I left Chicago the next morning, my mind an absolute mess. I had convinced myself before that it was just a one-time mistake. Then it became a pattern. Now it was something real. I flew home and walked through the door, expecting to feel that same emptiness as before. But this time, James was waiting for me in the kitchen, holding his phone. His face was pale. His eyes dark. My stomach dropped. "Who's Aiden?" My world stopped. James had never been the jealous type. He had never checked my phone, never questioned me about where I was. He trusted me. Until now. I swallowed, trying to think of a way out, some kind of excuse, but there was nothing. He knew. And I had no idea what to do next. For the first time since this all started, I was finally facing the consequences of my choices. And I wasn't sure if I was ready. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts. James held his phone in one hand, his knuckles white. I had never seen him look like this before, like a man unraveling in real time. I swallowed hard. "Where did you hear that name?" James let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Does it matter?" He looked down at his phone, then back at me. "I saw your messages." My blood ran cold. The texts. The ones I told myself were harmless, the ones that had never gone too far, until they did. I had been careful, deleting most of them. But clearly, not careful enough. "James. Don't." His voice was sharp, cutting through the thick silence between us. "Just tell me the truth. Are you sleeping with him?" I had two options, lie and try to salvage whatever was left of our marriage, or tell the truth and finally let the walls collapse. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I decided to stop running. Yes. The air between us shifted. It was like I had just set fire to everything we had built together, and now we were both watching the flames consume us. James closed his eyes, like he had been hoping, praying, that I would deny it. When he opened them again, they were wet, but no tears fell. He wasn't the kind of man who broke in front of people, not even me. "How long?" His voice was quieter now, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 3 months. He let out a shaky breath, running a hand over his face. He looked like a man who had been hit by a truck and was still trying to figure out if he was dead or alive. Why? That was the question, wasn't it? Why? Why did I risk everything for someone I barely knew? Why wasn't our life, our marriage, enough? I wanted to tell him the truth, but the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't just about Aiden. It was about me. About the version of myself I had become in this marriage, the version that felt more like a wife than a woman, like a roommate instead of a lover. But saying that out loud felt cruel. So I just shook my head. "I don't know." James let out a bitter laugh. "You don't know?" He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he was seeing me for the first time and realizing he didn't like what he saw. "You threw away everything we had, and you don't even know why?" I flinched, but I didn't argue. Because he was right. A long silence stretched between us. I wanted him to yell, to scream, to do anything other than just stand there like a man who had already lost. But James had never been one for dramatics. He finally sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Do you love him?" That question hit me harder than the rest. Did I? Aiden made me feel things I hadn't felt in years: excitement, passion, something dangerously close to obsession. But love? Love was something else entirely. I hesitated. And that hesitation was all the answer James needed. His expression hardened. I think you should leave. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the floor. James. I can't do this, Lena. His voice cracked on my name. I can't look at you and not see him. I can't sleep next to you and wonder if you're thinking about him. And I sure as hell can't pretend that we can just fix this. The finality in his voice hit me like a slap. I wanted to fight for us. I wanted to tell him that this didn't have to be the end. But deep down, I knew it already was. So I nodded. I packed a bag that night. James didn't watch. He just sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Before I walked out the door, I turned back one last time. I did love you, James. He didn't look at me. I loved you, too. And then I left. It's been 6 months since that night. I stayed with a friend for a while, then got my own place. The divorce papers came in the mail last week. I signed them without hesitation. And Aiden? We tried, for a little while. But it turns out that when something is built on secrets and stolen moments, it doesn't always survive in the daylight. We fell apart. Now, I'm alone. And for the first time in a long time, I'm figuring out who I am, outside of being a wife, outside of being someone's mistake. Do I regret what I did? Some days, yes. Other days, I think it was the only way I could finally wake up.